It's interesting that we've mentioned obviously all these English players, but the the next one is English as well, and that's Mason Mount, who this season has 3 assists from 4.5 xA, and I believe there are only 5 players who have more, 4 or 5 players who have a higher xA figure this season, and understandably that a lot of that comes from set pieces because he is on free kicks, corners for Chelsea. But just sort of looking that up, it's interesting because through the entirety of last season, Mount registered 4.6 xA in the Premier League, which there's effectively they're mirroring each other, and we're 2/3 of the season through. So there's scope to say that he has definitely improved in that regard. But there is the set piece caveat. How much value does a great set piece taker add to a team in terms of shot creating actions, boosting his own XA, boosting a team's total XG just by having a really good dead ball specialist.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that being on set pieces definitely helps to boost your numbers in that regard. But it's good that you kind of caveated it straight away as well, and that's something that we look to do in our writing, in the Athletic, and something that we do on the podcast as well, where you do have to kind of separate them out, because Mount is the perfect example of how it just simply inflates it so much. And I mean, looking at his expected assists again per 90, if you look at it with set pieces included, he's the third best looking at all the under 23 players. But you take out set pieces and he goes down to the 17th best. So again, just having that extra context, if you didn't know that he was on set pieces, you might have a misrepresentation of just how creative he is. So yeah, you're right to add in that set piece caveat. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely useful to have players who have great delivery and put it, in really dangerous areas. But I guess looking at that difference between assists and expected assists, in that he's got the opportunity to put it in great areas, but that discrepancy again comes from the fact that you need the players to get on the end of it. And Chelsea have, to be fair, Chelsea are really strong on set pieces this season. I think they're up there with the most goals scored from set pieces and from corners. Certainly, I think there's a few that stand out. Thiago Silva's got 1 or 2. Kurt Zuma's got a few as well. And yeah, that's down to the quality of the balls that played in, but it does rely on them actually finishing it, and potentially sometimes the finishing ability of these aerially dominant players at Chelsea might also make Mount actually look a little bit better as well, because if he's putting quality balls in, and no disrespect to, let's say, Sheffield United, but he's putting those balls in and they're not able to get on the end of it, then his overall numbers actually aren't going to be as good. But hopefully I'm saying things that are quite obvious to people here as well.
No, I think anybody who's watched Chelsea this season, who's watched Mason Mount closely, they'll know that from open play, as you say, his creative numbers, shall we say, are hugely helped by his set piece ability. And if you wanted to put a quantifier on it, 14 places essentially is what you just said. Taking him from third to down to 14th once you strip away the set pieces in terms of his creativity. It's interesting because he's actually had the most shot creating actions from dead balls this season in the Premier League with 35, and he was sort of ahead by quite a margin, which tells you that his delivery is good, and as you were saying there are ample opportunities for players to get on the end of them, because there clearly are, because shot creating actions are the 2 offensive actions directly preceding a shot. So a pass or a dribble or the foul that is won immediately before a shot is taken by either that player or a player that they are passed to by. So yeah, it shows that Mount has. It's not to say no, do not put Mason Mount in your fantasy team because he's not good. He's not actually good at creating the chances that we want from open play. No, to the contrary, he's very good at creating chances from dead balls. But that his numbers are perhaps a little bit inflated by that, and I think that's reflected in the fact that he's got a very, very high number of key passes this season, with only Grealish and Bruno Fernandes with more, and notably they have 10 assists and 9 assists respectively. A lot of those coming from open play, whereas Mount, a lot of his key passes are coming from these set pieces, which I suppose is why we should be careful with key pass data or chances created, these terms, because a key pass is just the pass that precedes a shot. Like as you were saying earlier, a player who dribbles 40 yards and then passes it to a player free in the 6-yard box, that's a key pass. But a player who passes just over the halfway line to a player who then goes in a mazy dribble and scores, or takes a shot, that's also a key pass. So is that essentially in a nutshell why we need to be careful with key pass data?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I know that you've spoken about this on the podcast before from listening to some of your episodes. So yeah, you're absolutely spot on, and we know what the better alternative is, and that's expected assists, which yeah adds that value and that context of the probability that pass that they're making is actually going to lead to a goal. And this is something as well, which is again we say on the podcast, and is important to say in all senses of the word from a football analytics perspective, that the context is key. And I know that we've spoken about it, a lot before, but it's absolutely crucial that we're not driven completely by the numbers. And there's a reason why, we're talking about the footballing context around Mason Mount, and we're not just going purely on his numbers. You need to actually, watch the game and see why that pass was like that, or whether it was actually as good a chance as we might think. And yeah, the context is key, is the absolute phrase that we always go by. You must actually dovetail the data with what you see by eye as well. Never should the two be completely separate, but we think that together they can be really supportive. And key passes is a key example of that, where if you are to look at it and say that someone's got more key passes than another, great. You might think that, okay, the one player is better than another, but that context of what that pass was is where it really comes into its own. And yeah, there are other measures that can help with that, like we said before about expected assists, but there's also watching the match and actually seeing that it was a key pass or it wasn't a key pass, and that adds context as well. So I'll keep saying it, but context is definitely key.
Yeah, well, that's a mantra to live by there with the context. And I mean, the example that was kind of popping into my head when you were saying that was, it would be like saying that just because a player has more shots than another, it makes them a better striker. Whereas, those shots could all have been ballooned over from 40 yards and, very much Alessandro Diamanti style. So, there are caveats, and as you say, the context is very important.